Hello and welcome to the Debating Toastcast, a podcast about all things debating, from the Debate Toastmasters Club 104 London debaters. Hello and welcome to part 2 of the podcast series on research. And this time we're going to be looking a little bit more on specific research. So in the previous episode, we looked more at the general approach, how you get a grip with the motion. What does the motion mean? What must it mean? What can't you get away from? And then what can you mean? How can you narrow it down in such a way that it's perhaps easier for you to defend it, while still, of course, answering the motion. You don't want to be accused of squirreling, the term that means to make it so ridiculously easy for yourself that it becomes unreasonable when you're on the proposition side. Now, when you're on the opposition side, you obviously need to think about what the motion might mean, because you want to think about what will the opposition possibly say? What could they possibly say about this? And you want to be ready for any scenario. Now, in this episode, we're going to look at a particular question. There's this one question that if you ask it, it's going to be a lot easier for you to find out what research you need to find in order to support your case. Anthony Weston, in his A Rule Book for Argument, which is recommended by the founder of 104 London Debaters, Paul Carroll, he writes that, and I quote, "To give an argument means to offer a set of reasons or evidence in support of a conclusion. Not all views are equal. Some conclusions can be supported by good reasons. Others have much weaker support." Now, the purpose of research is to find that good quality, solid support for your arguments and views. Or, well, the views you are assigned to support, which, of course, in a formal debate may not necessarily be your own personal and private views, of course. Now, according to another expert, Professor Jared Atchinson, in a great lecture series, which I recommend, it's called The Art of Debate, and it's available on Audible. It may be also available other places for all I know, but that's where I heard it. He said there are 3 main types of evidence. Firstly, the narrative. So that will be things like examples. It will be stories that you can tell. It will be obviously also in the whole structure of how you convey your arguments. But as a narrative, as a piece of evidence, it will be some sort of story or example that you can tell from the real world. The second type, so that was narrative. Second type is empirical. Empirical simply means by experience, but not experience in the sense of a personal anecdote. That will be more narrative. Empirical means observations such as scientific experiments, or from history, or what you can sort of demonstrate with statistics, for example, and numbers and facts like that. So empirical evidence can be very, very powerful because people tend to listen to numbers and figures when you quote them. People tend to feel that makes it sound more believable. However, statistics, as we know, can be misleading, can be easily misused. And so therefore, it's very important that, just because something is true, just because a number is true, well, that doesn't automatically prove that we should therefore do X, or we should do Y, or we should do something else. You need to weave it into the overall argument. Just machine gunning your arguments with 10,000 facts and lots of stats, that will not be convincing in and of itself, and your audience might actually completely zone out because you just bombard them with too much. But used properly, empirical evidence is really very powerful. Like 2 out of 3 people are convinced by numbers. I just made that up, by the way. All right, the third. Okay, so far we have narrative, stories, examples. We have empirical, so statistics, scientific experiments, history, blah, blah, blah. And then the third one, authoritative. So authoritative are the voices of the experts in the relevant fields. So that's important. Now, just because someone is a professor of history doesn't mean you want him to mess around in your bathroom, for example. In your bathroom, you'd rather have a plumber, although the historian, or it might be an economist, or it might be a medical doctor, they have perhaps what we call higher education than the plumber. However, when it comes to plumbing, he's the expert. The plumber is the expert. And you want to listen to the plumber. You want to listen to the guy who has relevant expertise in the field that the debate is about. So that's important. Must be relevant. All right. Now, I promised you to tell you there's one question that I certainly find really helpful to ask when I am preparing a speech. So I've done the general research. I'm now getting ready to get down to the nitty-gritty, to the specifics. All right. So what do I do? Well, I start to write out my speech. I write the introduction. And then I think, what would be a really good point to hit people with here? What would be powerful to convince people? What, and this is the key question, what, if it were really true, would actually be super helpful for my argument? What would be really good for my argument if it happened to be true? If it happened to be true that people are more likely to buy things that are blue, if I could find some study that showed that 8 out of 10 people will choose something that's blue over any other color. And that's a really powerful argument to say that this product we're producing now, we need to make it blue, because 8 out of 10 people. So ask yourself, what kind of empirical evidence, what kind of narrative evidence, perhaps, what kind of voice of authority could I find to support my argument? And then you start to look for that. You go and you just Google it. All right. You say, for example, okay, let's take a bananas example, for example, so to speak, just to make it something unpolitical. So let's say, for example, you're on the proposition side of the motion. This house would provide school children with free bananas. All right, free bananas. Okay, so you are now beginning to prepare an argument. You want to start to put down your specifics. So you ask yourself, okay, what, if it were true, would be really a good support for the argument that we should provide free bananas? Well, for example, if there was a study or several studies, preferably perhaps a meta-study with 15 studies included, showing that bananas really help children in their studies, in their schoolwork, that the children who ate bananas, their results were so much better than other children. So obviously then, okay, so the first thing you do, you Google studies showing connection between bananas and school results and see what comes up. I don't think you'll find much on this particular one, which is partly why I chose it, because it's sort of a little bit beyond any specifics here. This is just a theoretical example. Now, let's say that you find this empirical evidence, this backing that bananas would be good for children. Well, then that's a good basis. That's a good backing for the premise that giving bananas to children would help them learn, and therefore we should give it to them in school, give them bananas in school. Now, obviously, all claims that you make in a debate must be supported. That's the whole point. Otherwise, what you're doing, you're not actually debating. You're just sharing your prejudice. Then there are some people, they show up to a debate and they just make claim after claim after claim after claim after claim with no backing. Well, I'm sorry, but that's uninteresting. Any claim made in a debate without proper backing, you can disregard it. You can say, I don't know if that's true. That may be true. It may be a lie. I don't know. So that's it. It's out. It's gone. Don't take it seriously. You have to support every claim you make, one way or another, whether by saying that this is logical because, and then you show the logic, or this is has shown, these studies have shown this to be true, or whatever. Now, preferably you want to find more than one study. One reputable study is fine, but if you can find more than one, that is, of course, much better. And if you have a meta-study that pulls together, say, 15, 20, even 30 studies, well, absolutely better still. Okay, so that's the empirical side, to find studies, to find statistics, all that sort of stuff. But then also you can move on to narrative evidence. You can say, well, what kind of story, what kind of example would be really helpful to illustrate my point, to show the sort of point I'm trying to make it more concrete and vivid to people. Because one thing is making a sort of a completely theoretical argument to people, but if you can show it with an example, if you can say that, oh, there was this my great aunt Agatha, when this happened to her, blah blah blah, and that's why we need this policy to support and help people like my poor old aunt Agatha, then it becomes more vivid to people. People can relate to it. And that is what Aristotle talked about when he talked about pathos, which is not just about being emotional. It's not about crying your eyes out or something. It's about relating to people. It's about creating a vivid image in people's minds. And you do that through examples. Examples is the best way to do that. Now, the next thing then is that you move on to authoritative evidence. Okay, so these are the experts. You want to find some experts. Perhaps in the case of the bananas example, if you can find an educator with many years experience in the field, who perhaps gave an interview to a newspaper talking about the great efficacy of the consumption of bananas in children, he would say, oh, we have given bananas to our children here, and we have seen the great difference in the children who ate bananas and the children who didn't eat it. It's absolutely beyond doubt that bananas will help children, so that's great. So then you can quote that if you have an expert from one of the reputable universities or something, then that's great as well. You can quote him. You can say, Professor so-and-so said that in his experience, he has seen, all these, he's made different studies and experiments. All right. So then you have something for all of those three categories, empirical, and then the narrative and the authoritative. And you get something for each category. It needn't be equal. You can have more of one, less of another. But the main thing is that you have something of all of those three, because that will really make a powerful package when you put it all together nicely. All right. There's another 3 questions to ask. All these questions, I know, but that's how it works. You ask yourself questions and then you answer them. And the other 3 questions you need to ask in order to determine whether a piece of evidence is helpful, whether it's better than another piece of evidence. When you look at, you have a Google page full of evidence, full of articles, full of studies. All right, so which one do you choose? Well, question number 1, how recent is this? Okay, so if it's a 30-year-old study, well, it may have been superseded by newer studies. So you always want to try and find the newest available study. All right. Also, the same with an example. An example, say, from back in the 1950s. Well, it may be relevant, but it may not be relevant for today's society. It just depends a bit on the nature of the example, of course, and also the nature of the motion. So just be careful about it and think about it. Generally, as a rule, the more recent, the better, unless there are some particular reasons why that is not true in a particular instance. The second question is, well, how controversial is this? Okay, so if a study, for example, or a voice of authority is very, very controversial, then some of your audience members may find it compelling, whereas others will be completely put off by it. So, say, for example, you base your entire argument on the efficacy of homeopathy, or you quote the Book of Mormon or the Quran or the Bible. There are some people who will simply be put off and they will not trust that particular backing that you have just presented to them. So just be careful that it's not too controversial. And then thirdly, how trusted is this source? And that includes the sub-question, trusted by whom? All right. So here in Britain, for example, the Office of National Statistics is generally very well trusted. It's generally something that people, whatever your political persuasion, you will sort of more or less find that as a pretty believable source of information. And therefore, it's generally a good source of data. But if you quote, say, an activist group, whether it's a climate change campaign group or an anti-climate change campaign group or whatever it is, well, that's less likely to be persuasive to the general audience than if you have some sort of more or less neutral expert or more neutral organization. Remember, I also said there was a sub-question. Who trusts this source? Trusted by whom? And the reason why it's important to ask yourself who would trust your source, well, that goes back to authoritative evidence. So if you're trying to convince those people who are on the fence, for example, those people who abstained during the first vote, or even those who voted against you first time around, well, then you need to be careful about what kind of evidence you present, because there's no point in preaching to the choir, as they say. There's no point trying to convince the people who are already on your side. You obviously you want to keep them there, but you need to bring over the people who were skeptical to start with, in particular the undecideds. And how do you do that? Well, what that means is that you can use your source as part of your rhetoric. I mean, the who the source is or what the source is becomes part of what is persuasive about it. So, for example, if you quote someone like Jordan Peterson or Noam Chomsky, well, they are two controversial gentlemen. But depending on where you come from politically, you'll find them more or less controversial. And you just need to keep that in mind. If I'm trying to convince some left-wing person to come with me, I will quote Noam Chomsky, because then he's more likely to feel that that's a powerful, believable source. If I'm trying to convince someone who's more right-leaning, then perhaps Peterson is a better source of choice. Okay. Now, if you can find people who are not terribly controversial, that's probably better for the general audience in most cases. But as I said, if you want to convince a left-wing audience, find a left-wing source that supports your argument. And if you want to convince those more on the right, then find a right-wing source to support your claim. So your source itself becomes part of your rhetoric. Part of what is persuasive about it is that, hey, look, someone who agrees with you agrees with me, and therefore you should agree with me. That's basically the line of thinking, but obviously you don't say that. You just imply it. So in conclusion then, remember, ask yourself when you start to sort of narrow in on a particular argument that you want to make, or a particular set of arguments, ask yourself, what if this were true would really help me? And then go and find it. Obviously, if you can't find it, then you can't use it. Right? That's as simple as that. You have got to make a backing for every claim you make. You have got to be able to back up every claim you make. This is really important in debating. Otherwise, you're not really a serious debater. You are just spewing out assertions, and that's really not what debate is all about. Once you find research sources, ask yourself, well, how recent is this? And remember, the more recent, the better. Ask yourself, how controversial is this? And preferably, you want something that's not too controversial. And 3, how trusted is the source? Is it a very trusted source? Is it someone nobody has ever heard about? And the sub-question there is, trusted by whom? And here you can also think about using your source as part of your rhetoric. So if you want to convince left-wing people, use more left-leaning sources. If you want to convince right-wing people, use more right-leaning sources, and basically making the implicit argument that these people agree with you and they also agree with me, and so you should agree with me. You've been listening to the Debating Toastcast. Feel free to leave a comment, critical or encouraging. We welcome both. And if you'd like more information about joining the club or coming first as a guest, please have a look at our website, 104londondebaters.club, or send us an email on info@104londondebaters.club. That's info@104londondebaters.club. Thank you for listening.